Hello again everyone, and good morning from Tokyo, Japan. Welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. Today we're going to be having a look at a really interesting Japanese camera. It is going to be the Canon 7 interchangeable lens rangefinder camera. If you're interested in purchasing this camera or another vintage Japanese camera, I sell these in my Etsy and eBay stores. Please check the description below the video for links to my stores. The Canon 7 was introduced in 1961, which is interesting because by 1961 the SLR camera was already in wide production here in Japan. But there was still demand for rangefinder cameras, particularly those which used the Leica L mount. Over the previous years, a large number of these lenses had been produced by Canon, Leica, Minolta, Konica, and other makers. And Canon realized that producing camera bodies which accepted these lenses would still sell well. So they decided to make a very advanced camera for the time to utilize this lens system, and the Canon 7 was the result. The Canon 7 was the most advanced interchangeable lens rangefinder camera which Canon produced. If you look at the front of the camera, we have the self-timer lever here. We have the window for the selenium light meter. In the middle of this window is a small clear window, which is for the rangefinder. We have a matte lens in the middle here, which allows light to go in for the projected frame lines. And then here we have the viewfinder window. What makes the Canon 7 better than Canon's other rangefinder cameras at the time was the viewfinder. The Canon 7 featured a really nice and large one-to-one viewfinder, which allowed you to shoot with two eyes. You could look through the viewfinder with one eye and focus and keep your other eye open to see what was going on around. This is a very useful feature and was only available on the high-end Japanese cameras of the day. This camera is fitted with a 50mm f1.8 lens, which is the most common lens which Canon sold in the camera package. It's an outstanding lens. It's a very good performer, provided you can find one which has no haze in it. The problem with the 51.8 lens is that it's very susceptible to haze, which etches deeply into the glass inside of the lens. And if you're lucky, the minor haze can be cleaned up rather simply. Haze, which is a little bit thicker, you can sometimes get out with toothpaste on a wet cotton swab. But at least half the time the haze cannot be removed. Minor haze doesn't have much of an effect on photos, but anything more than minor haze has kind of a noticeable effect. This particular lens is clean and has no haze, so it's, I was quite happy to find it. So, taking a look at the top of the camera, we have the film winding and shutter cocking lever here. The shutter button is located next to that. Around the shutter button we have the release switch for the winding mechanism. By turning it to the R setting, that releases the mechanism and allows you to rewind the film. Once the film is loaded, switch it back to the button here by the A and it's ready to go. By switching it to the red dot, that locks the winding mechanism and prevents the camera from being accidentally wound or the shutter from being accidentally fired. Next to that we have the shutter speed selector dial, and inside that there's a window on the top on both sides which show the film speed. You can adjust the film speed by pushing this button on the back of the top cover and turning the shutter dial until the appropriate film speed lines up in the window. Next to that we have the light meter readout. And there are two sets of numbers. One is in white and one is in orange. When you're using the light meter in daylight in normal mode, you would use the white numbers. And when you are shooting indoors or in low light, you would use the red numbers. The light meter has a selector switch on the back with two colors. One is black and one is orange. When you have it selected to black, that is for outdoor shooting. And when you have it selected to orange, that is for indoor or low light shooting. It's quite simple to use the light meter, provided the light meter is working, which is some hit and miss in these cameras. What you do is you point the meter at your subject and or the camera at your subject, and you look at the top and of the meter, and it shows aperture settings. So my camera is set to 1/125th second, and it recommends a shutter speed setting of f2.8. So I simply select f2.8 and the camera is ready to shoot. If I move it to a darker position, of course I have to open up the aperture a little bit more in order to get a good exposure. The light meters in these, even when they work, they're not necessarily accurate. I would recommend using a handheld light meter, or if you use a smartphone, use a light meter app. That makes it easier to get good exposures. Next to the meter readout, we have a selector switch for the different frame lines. So you have settings for 35mm, 50mm, 100mm or 85mm, and 135mm. Earlier cameras like the Canon P had all the different frame lines visible in the viewfinder at all times, which works really well, but it makes the viewfinder kind of cluttered. The Canon 7 features a much cleaner viewfinder. You only see the frame lines for the lenses that you have mounted, rather than all of the frame lines for all of the lenses. For earlier Canon cameras, before the Canon P, you had to use accessory viewfinders mounted to the top in order to see what the lens saw. So the Canon 7 was really an improvement over the earlier cameras. And it's also really nice to be able to use the 35mm lens with a 1:1 finder. It makes it much easier to focus and compose with this system. On the side here you have the sink for the flash, and here you have on the bottom of the side the release latch to open the film door. Before you open the film door, you have to turn the locking lever clockwise, and then the film door opens. Inside the back of the camera we see the shutter curtains, and the Canon 7 features stainless steel shutter curtains which are black anodized. These are really sturdy and rugged shutter curtains. They are very easily dented or bent or wrinkled. The wrinkles and dents and such make no difference at all in how the camera works. They can have really bad wrinkles, but so long as there are no tears or holes in the shutter curtains, and that's really hard to do, the camera should work properly. The Canon 7, like the Canon P, sometimes the shutter doesn't fully open on the 1/1000th second shutter speed setting. And sometimes the shutter does not fully close. As I mentioned in my video about the Canon P, you can fix this problem by removing the bottom cover of the camera. And there are two adjusters on the bottom of the under the bottom cover inside for the two different drums which pull the curtains. The one closest to the film plane is for the leading curtain, and to make the shutter speed work at the 1/1000th speed by simply turning it maybe an eighth or a quarter of a turn clockwise and locking it down. That will get the 1/1000th shutter speed working again. If the shutter is not closing all the way, in the middle there's kind of an intermediary gear which turns when the shutter turns. Put a few drops of lighter fluid on this intermediary gear and cycle the shutter a few times, and it will unstick, and then the shutter will close all the way. The Canon 7 is a really good camera. It's very solid. It's a wonderful camera if you like shooting the 50 or 35mm lenses, particularly 35mm lenses. The viewfinder is really well suited toward that. Once again, the light meter is very iffy on these. It always works accurately in the low light mode. So if you get one of these cameras, you'll have no trouble shooting it indoors or on cloudy days. The only weak part is in the normal mode. It's a really interesting camera, really fun to shoot, and I really recommend it if you're looking for a good camera for shooting Leica L-mount lenses. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and please subscribe if you want to see more videos. I plan to release as many videos as time allows. Thanks again, and see you again soon, I hope.